The majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
That can't be the gospel, because God said to love our neighbors.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
All right. Well, Tori, Owens, and Jonathan Foster, welcome to the Liminal Living podcast. I don't have like two people on at once that often. It's only happened one other time. So this is kind of a special moment for me.
Yay.
Yeah, we're out of control.
It's nuts.
It's going to be a conversation that is just like, who's talking now? I don't know. So I'm going to try my best to manage, but I really want you to do most of the talking anyway. So
that's fabulous.
I'm cool with that.
And you know what I'm going to do right now is plug in my computer because I just realized my battery, which I should have checked before.
Oh, I did that too. Like I actually moved my computer while I was talking with you in the pre-show stuff, and I dislodged a cord that was recording something again, and it got all funky on me. So
you got to stay on top of the batteries.
While Tori's plugging in, Jonathan, what have you been up to?
Oh, man. Well, most recently, actually, I saw Tori last weekend because we had an open and relational theology conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I was there Friday and Saturday, and then Saturday I drove to Gainesville, Florida, because as I've been saying, everyone once in their lifetime should drive from Charlotte to Gainesville.
Yes.
I don't see why not.
I know.
I also don't see why.
I also don't see why, right. And then I spoke at a friend's church Sunday morning and then flew home through Dallas. So I've been in like 6 states in 48 hours, but I'm back home and had a great weekend.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's a lot going on. Well, I would ask, I guess, Tori, what have you been up to other than open and relational stuff? I guess you were away on the weekend too.
I was in Charlotte, North Carolina with Jonathan and others. And Friday I drove in Thursday night, left Saturday. So I was back here acclimating a little bit back to Georgia time and life and all that good stuff on Sunday. So, but it was a lovely weekend. So, yeah, it's a really good weekend.
Tori skipped church on Sunday,
people.
by the way, Tom.
Which I typically do. That is my regular.
So nothing changed there. So.
Nothing. I was very consistent.
Nice. I was just talking with Josh Patterson last week. So his episode airs just before this one. And he's a big open relational theology guy. So
yeah, Josh was at this conference too. So we got to see
picture.
Was
well, cool.
What a nice guy he is. His energy.
He is.
What a gentle spirit and soul he is.
I know. He is deceptively intelligent too, because he's just t-shirt, backwards hat, and drinking a beer, and then he will walk circles around you academically.
Yeah.
I'm just like, this guy is smart.
He is.
See, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm deceptively unintelligent.
Well, Jonathan, you've been on the show. It was, I think, 1.5 years ago when you wrote your book Indigo, and we talked. And you were a jerk because you made me cry. You're the only person that made me cry on my own podcast. Oh, I remember that. I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to leave that in there too. But it was a great conversation. And Tori, this is your first time here. Yeah. So what is your background, Tori? What are you up to?
What I would lead with is I'm a full-time therapist. So I spend the majority of my days, Monday through Thursday mainly, sitting with people virtually and in person, as they kind of walk through struggles and traumas and deconstructing and all the things, grief, everything, anything. So that's how I spend the majority of my time. And then in my spare time, I'm trying to write a dissertation in open and relational theology. Trying to do that and pull in some mysticism and all that wonderful stuff. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah. And then trying to cook and make some sourdough bread and grocery shop and all the other stuff. And put in like pavers in a sidewalk, things like that. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
You got to keep the life happening too, even while you're getting a doctorate degree.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. And Jonathan, what have you been up to other than Open Relational Theology Conference? You've been doing a lot of podcasting
Yeah.
and stuff, Substacking.
Yeah, as Tori likes to call it, sub pod, because we do the Substack
Subpod.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a chance to talk to a lot of great people recently, so that's been fun. I've got a new little series of books out just last week. It's called the Microtheology series,
Mhm.
and I released 4
Yes.
at once because why not? So I did
Why not?
did something on atonement, sexuality, eschatology, and hell in a open and relational kind of a take. So that's occupied a lot of my time. I run a nonprofit out of Haiti. I'm on a couple nonprofit boards. One of those boards also Tori is on. It's a new organization called OpenTable.network. And recently, the board asked me to be the director of that group. And we're credentialing and resourcing clergy, pastors, chaplains, counselors who have, for the most part, almost every person has been pressured out of their, formerly conservative circles and needed a place, a new theological, ecclesiological home to land. And so we're at the beginning stages of what all that might be. In the old days, we probably would have called it a denomination, but I don't think we're going to call it a denomination, but it'll be something like that. So I'm doing that, and yeah, probably a couple things I didn't even think of, but it's probably a little too much right now.
You
You're
got a lot
busy.
going on.
Yeah.
Man, you could, instead of a denomination, you could just call it a revolution. How about that?
Yes. Well,
I like that.
we had an interesting conversation. Tori, we were at the
Nice.
table and we were talking last weekend, and we were just brainstorming about it, and we were talking about post-denomination, and then someone said trans-denomination, and I kind of like the way that sounds, and
No, but
so maybe that'll be in the tagline or something. But yeah,
yeah.
we'll see. Language matters, so we're trying to figure out how to use it.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
So what? And if I could, this is what's interesting to yes, these 4 micro theology books that came out. What's interesting is last week, so I got an advance copy because I'm a subscriber to your Substack, right? And I was reading some last week, and in session with one of my clients last week, I rolled out your definition of love and found it so incredibly helpful, and she did too, and it was so powerful because it was just this real life kind of definition, right? And I couldn't rattle it off to you right now, but it meant so much. I wanted to tell you that it was incredibly important, and meeting someone right where they were is powerful.
Nice. Jonathan, do you remember what you wrote? Like, I'm curious now. What is your definition of love?
It's a good one.
Yeah, so my working definition of love is that it's a non-violent, non-scapegoating, non-binary energy in relationship with God and the whole world that's meant for the non-complete flourishing of everyone and everything.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's a big, all-encompassing definition of love right there.
It's trying to basically, that is what I've been doing in my work off and on for the last 10, almost 11 years, is essentially trying to vet what love is, think about what it is and then vet my definitions. And I kept adding these things to it. So yeah, nonviolent, non-binary, non-scapegoating energy in relationship with God and the whole world that's meant for the non-complete flourishing of everyone and everything. I still might have to add a word here or there, but I think we're kind of gotten there.
That's a nice running definition right now. Tori, I see why you couldn't just rattle that off, because that is.
No, I could not.
Yeah.
But it touches on so many different things, right?
Yeah.
And right now, what seems to be a theme with, and I'm just going to start chatting about something.
Yes, please. Let's
Tom,
do it.
Yes, I'm just having a conversation that some of my clients, that many of us who come out of very traditional theologies, evangelical, right, fundamentalist traditions, is that we get this idea of what love should look like or what we should do in situations. And it could be very abusive situations where someone's come out of this environment, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, any of those things, and then they think to be loving, they have to do something even more, right? Like, so how this has been showing up lately with clients is that if they just show up in a setting, a social setting, and there's an abuser there that they know is there, they believe they have to do something extra to be loving.
Mm.
And so I pulled out Jonathan's definition and I went, did it fit this definition? The way you showed up? And they were like, you mean, wait a minute. I go, you could have showed up, you could have burned down the house. You could have shown up and you could have just demolished everyone in there. You could have shown up in such a way where you called out this person in front of everybody around you. And how you chose to show up, what you chose to do instead is you showed up, and you showed up humbly. You showed up in the fullness of who you were, and you showed up in such a way that you were loving to all the people around you. You might not have talked to this person. You might not have had interaction with person, yet you chose how you were going to show up, and it was a choice, right? And it's the first time that many people who've been on an abusive side of things realize that, oh my gosh, you mean I had a choice to be a complete and utter like asshole? And they go, oh my God, I did choose something here. I did choose something that was about flourishing and another way to live and walk through life that was incredibly healing and non-violent. So yeah, it's an awesome definition.
Yeah, I do like that. And it's really hard to like put defining terms on God these days, but there's a prayer that I've latched onto and included it in our liturgy for Sunday mornings, and we say the prayer every Sunday after we kind of collect in a plate kind of written down prayer requests or things that were causing us anxiety or concern or joy or gratitude. We write them down, we collect them in a plate, put them on the altar, and light a candle. And then we say the all shall be well prayer by St. Teresa of Avila. But there's a second part of it that I found and then added it to the liturgy. And I'm like, this is the part that's more important, because you can get into this all shall be well is really just optimistic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But the second part is the why all shall be well. I just never heard. But when I heard it, I introduced it. It's all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. For there is a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and will never let us go.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why didn't we hear the second paragraph of that until just now? Like,
I like that.
It's beautiful.
That is, and then that just fits in with you're putting terms around that force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and never lets us go, that I think are very important. Because Tori, as you said, the how you define love can like really dictate how you show up to be loving in a certain situation. And if you have an improper understanding of love, then you might show up in an enabling situation or a subservient situation, or all those different ways that we learned in our different, evangelical upbringings that really don't necessarily define love. So this is a really great way to start this conversation.
Yeah, you're so right. Like
Good.
the context I grew up in, mostly good people, individually, lots of them meant well, but the system thought that it had the definition of love. It basically co-opted all this stuff and assimilated this Jesus story into kind of their own, essentially, empire building story. And it's not really love at all. It's the myth of redemptive sacrifice, and it's violent, and it's scapegoating, promoting, and it's certainly binary. So all those things. So it's interesting how you can talk with my former group, God bless them, and you can talk about love, and they can be nodding their head, but once you start double clicking on each of these things, it's going to create antagonism. So I think it's incredibly important that, it's back to language matters, words matter, and which, of course, a writer would say that. I hope people think that.
Yes.
That is, there was a friend, we were talking about the different languages that we use for um, being welcoming versus including of the
Right.
LGBTQ community. And a lot of churches do that bait and switch where all are welcome here, but then they put up all those guardrails and, like you're not allowed past this way and you're not allowed to over here and teach and lead and all that other stuff, but you're welcome to come. And I said the words like welcoming doesn't necessarily mean affirming and inclusive. Those are different languages because it's different definitions of how we would use the term love in that situation. Like, oh, we'll welcome you here to conform to what we already understand you should be. And it's like, that's okay in their mind because that's how they define love. It's like, it's loving for us to demand you become like us. And it's really not with Jonathan's running definition. So I like that.
Yeah.
I like that definition.
So it fascinated because what I was speaking about on whatever day it was that this week, I've got my days mixed up, was about personal stories. But I think too, what you're touching on, Tom, is this idea of the church and the church as an authority, right? And I was talking about the energy going this way. It's of course, it's hierarchical. Traditionally, it's patriarchal. And the energy or the movement of authority is always one direction, always, right? And so what I was talking about in personal stories is that when we start listening to personal stories, when we start truly loving, right, who comes in the door, or better yet, when we move outside the doors, right, that we must receive and believe that we don't hold a position of authority over everyone else around us because it's that same colonizing mindset, right? It's always been there. So how do we then have a posture of love and a stance of love? And I kind of believe the only way we do that is we move out in the world, that we don't stay in the building and have people come to us as if we are the center of that. Here we are, offering up our authority and say so on whatever it may be. Yeah.
Yes. You're touching on like a problem that has been on my heart for a while, is that how we use our authority. Like we have an assumption that we have it when we leave the building. And then there's like these demands that we put on people when we leave the building. And I do about 30 to 40 funerals a year for the local funeral home because I'm apparently very good at them. I talk about grief. And I did a funeral for a 21-year-old young man who passed away of cancer. And he was not religious, not spiritual. And they requested, please don't do a religious service. It wasn't really who he was, so we don't need that. And so I honored that. I just did a non-religious service. I didn't pray. I didn't use scripture. I didn't preach a message. I just talked about grief and what it looks like and how it works, how you can work with it and move forward, and talked about the reality of grief and the trauma. Like just really did an explanation of this is how it works. And like people were coming up to me afterwards and saying that was so helpful. Why don't people talk about grief at funerals more often? This was great. And the Monday after, I got a phone call from a pastor up north, and he was at a Free Methodist church, and he just chewed me out. He right. I did a whole solo podcast episode on about controlling religious language. But he was assuming authority over me that he didn't have. Like I'm really disappointed in you. You didn't preach the gospel. You didn't say scripture. You didn't pray. You didn't, and all you did was offer him a secular humanism and blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, boy, this guy is out of touch with reality. Like where it didn't conform to his ideas and understanding of things. But he's used to having everything conform to his way. He's used to having that authority. I'm allowed to walk into a room and just claim this authority and swing it around. And I was just like, hey, I'm sorry, I have different theology than you. And we ended the conversation, and I haven't heard from him since. But that was an eye-opening moment for me where I saw it in action. And then I put words, Jonathan, words matter, right? I put words around it and defined it. It's like, oh, he's using high control religious language to try and manipulate me. Same me. degrade me, all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was just like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, it just totally didn't work. It just bounced off of me because I know what's going on. But a lot of people don't see it. They just claim, they assume, oh, this person has authority. Oh, I guess I screwed up. And there's not loving stances there. But that's when I really saw it in action in my own life, Tori. It was that moment. And put words around it, and that was really helpful to define it, call it out, name it, and repent of it when I've used it in the past myself. And so, yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think we all have like this God assumption that we're kind of taught a God assumption. We're all taught a God assumption. Like, we picture God in a certain way, and that God has to act in a certain manner and towards a certain goal. That's our God assumption. And how have you experienced that God assumption in your own backgrounds, either in helpful or wounding ways? Because we all kind of have those. It's probably evolved over time. Could you kind of like spell out some of those God assumptions that you had in your past that maybe were helpful, but maybe also in wounding ways as well?
Well, we can start with probably the big one in terms of open and relational theology, which what I've come to now is in terms of omnipotence and omnipotence, right? So, and I think a way to just kind of talk about it is that a God leading with power as opposed to a God leading with love, right? And omnipotence is the tie of, power and love together. It's a word that Tom Ord is created and all of that. But what I like to think of it as is that, like, love is the ground, love is the essence, and love is the outcome, right? All of that. It holds all that together. So I think that's a big one for me. How I saw it kind of play out in terms of growing up in a very strict evangelical tradition was that, like, you taught plan A, plan B, plan C, plan Z, and all these kinds of things of, oh my gosh, there's this God in the sky, knows everything, knows all the outcomes, knows all the things, right? And I somehow have to figure that out. I can't think of anything more anxiety producing than trying to figure out the way God might think as an omnipotent presence, right? That feels really scary and anxiety producing. And then constantly feeling as if you're never going to get it right. You're never going to measure up. You never can quite sleuth it out to the degree that you need to. And oh my God, have I totally screwed up my life for all time? I think I might have, right? So that idea alone, I think, has shifted for me from omnipotent to a loving God, an omnipotent God, where, who is not all knowing about the future and all the implications of that. Yeah. So that's a big one.
I've not thought of like God being this omniscient being, but it's our responsibility to try and figure out what the omniscient being is thinking about and then align ourselves with it.
Yes.
I've never thought about it that way, but that is anxiety producing because we're supposed to figure it out. And it's like, I'm not eternal and omniscient. How am I supposed to figure it out? And he doesn't give very many clues.
No, not at all.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Jonathan, what about you? What kind of God assumptions have evolved over your life that are in big ways?
Yeah. I think all the assumptions have evolved, but that is definitely a big one. The move from omnipotence to omnipotence, and that am part, that was what Tori was referring to. Like, that's a Thomas J. Ord coined thing, but the am is like we get the word amigo, like friend. I can't remember some of the other words, amiable, those kinds of things. And it's the prefix of love. So instead of a power God, it's a love God. So let me say one thing about that, and then I'll tell you the next thing I thought of. But one thing about that is it doesn't mean that open and relational thinkers, omnipotent people, don't think God doesn't have power. It's just relational power versus what we've already been talking about, controlling, authoritative, hierarchical power. They're closely related sometimes. sometimes I say, like, it's like the difference between someone who mugs you in the alley and a surgeon. They both have masks. They both have sharp knives. They're both going to cut you open and take your money. But one of them
True.
is meant for your good. The other is meant to take you out.
That is brilliant.
Relational power and authoritative controlling power are closely related. But ultimately, when you play it out, when you double click on what all of that means, it goes in a direction that is not beneficial for the adherent, the person, the individual. After a while, it always winds up benefiting the God and the system, and I think that is fundamentally broken. So I agree with that. I think the number one thing is the move from omnipotence to omnipotence. But Tori took mine, so I'll go with this. I'll go with the second piece, slightly more nuanced, but it was actually in my definition of love. It's the non-complete flourishing of everything, and I added the prefix "non" to it because I grew up in a system, and I think actually most religion is like this. Most humans operate like this, whether we're talking about economics, politics, religion, anything. We want to get the thing inside of us to fill us, to complete us. And it was a radical shift somewhere 8, 10, 12 years ago. It really started to change from this move for me of Jesus is not the thing that fulfills my desires. Rather, Jesus brings a relationship that fundamentally alters the way I desire. So he doesn't complete me, as in, Jerry Maguire. There is a sense of completeness, but if that thing that I'm interacting with is love itself is a non-complete kind of an energy, because there's holes, there's gaps, and the embodiment of love, Jesus, I think, demonstrates that when the last words on the cross are, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He goes to his death without being saved and fulfilled and completed. And so I'm constantly wrestling with that now. That is obviously not something I was able to do in my previous lifetime, or many people get to be able to do in any of their kind of situations. So anyhow, if you superimpose that over capitalism or politics or whatever, we're people who constantly keep thinking we're going to get that thing out there and get it inside of us, and then we'll be good. If we're talking about a God of love, first of all, it's messed up because that God is omnipresent. So as much as I don't like omnipotence or omniscience, I'm still down with omnipresence. So first of all, it's already broken because God is already with us. But secondly, to the degree that we get anything inside of us, that if it's love, that thing already comes packaged with some brokenness. Well, maybe not brokenness, but gap, lack, risk. So now you got to risk. And so I've really enjoyed. No, have I enjoyed it? I found it meaningful to explore what all of that might mean, and that's not something I was brought up with.
Like Ronald Rolheiser wrote a book called Holy Longing, that he said your spirituality is whatever you do with your desire. And I thought that was really interesting because kind of that evangelical marketing of Jesus is, he completes you and makes everything lovely and you won't need anything ever again. And it's like, well, that's not really true. And nobody really believes it, but we all say it anyways. But if our spirituality is what we would do with our desire, then if it were also true that Jesus fulfills all our desires, then we would have no spirituality. And like we have to have a desire to do. We're humans, so we have to have a desire. So Jesus doesn't fulfill our desires, but I like how he said, change how I desire, what I desire, where I direct that desire. That's a really cool thought. I like that.
Well, and I think is that desire itself stems from a type of lack. Like you don't desire something if you already have it. So. And that seems to be consistent with my view of love. Like I think the singularity out of which all of this comes is love. And so love might have this built-in gap, this lack, and so there's desire in the heart of the divine. We are made in that image and likeness, and we have desire because there's a gap in us, and then also we're imitating those around us, and so we're imitating their lack. So, and that's not necessarily bad. That's just kind of the way it is, I think. And so desire is born out of that lack to begin with. So all of that is a way to like embrace longing and desire in a really healthy, I think, human way that a more simplistic religion they just don't have time for any of that kind of stuff. It's too scary. We got to just smash it all down. Just get God inside of you.
Can't control it.
And be complete.
You can't control that way.
Yes, exactly. No, but there's something just so static in that, isn't there? It's something that you said, Tom, in terms of the idea of the evangelical that get God in you, right? That there's something quite static in that, and I desire and all this. It allows for fluidity and change and movement, and I love that. I love anything that allows for that fluidity and development and growth and change and evolution.
I think a lot of the God assumptions that we live with now are really outdated, like from medieval times, that the Lord in the Tower feudal system, how it works. And we just assume that, well, since God is hierarchical power, it's got to look like that, and so blessings come from the Lord in the Tower. And so we have this understanding, but the tower is just up in the sky really high, like God's this man up in the sky that sometimes shows up and blesses, but most of the time just stays in the tower.
Right.
I find it worked for their world. It made sense in their world. They contextualized that theology in the world that they lived in. Probably wasn't true, but it was a contextualization of that world. And I'm trying to reimagine God for this modern world, because if you look at how our understanding of psychology and cosmology and evolution and even the nature of physics and science, all of this has radically changed in just the last 100 years. And I'm wondering how we can reimagine God in the modern world, because it seems like this medieval Lord in the Tower understanding of God is just, it doesn't work anymore. And a lot of people just are saying, they're assuming that is the faith, that is God, and that is no longer working. So then therefore there is no need for faith or God or whatever. But I'm just wondering how we can reimagine God in this world. So if we were to just erase all of our previous theology and understanding of God that was downloaded into us just from ages past and cultures, and we were just to look around, and each of you in your professions looking around at the humans in your life and the nature that you exist within and the ecology, what assumptions would you make about God in the world that you see and experience if you didn't have the pre-downloaded God assumptions in there beforehand? What kind of God would you see and say, oh, God must be like this because I have these experiences, I notice these things? It's basically recontextualizing God for the modern world, basically. It's kind of the question I'm poking at with a stick.
Just no small question, right?
And you could just pick one off the tree and just talk about it. You don't have to have the full answer. Just,
wow.
Well, I think
what kind of God?
That's a great question, because one of the things that I think the three of us are probably committed to, and I think any healthy philosophical outlook, psychological, spiritual, religious outlook should have as well, is this idea that my lived experience matters. And so Alfred North Whitehead has this great statement about how I think he's talking about God when he says this. God is not a exception, but an exemplification. But in terms, or maybe he's talking about individuals. Either way, I'm going to use it for me, my own individual. I'm not an exception to reality. I am an exemplification at some level of what is going on. So, and it has to be that way. Our lived experience has to matter to some degree. People are frequently like, "Oh, well, you're just, making up that." Well, I'm like, well, yeah, I am making stuff up because I've gone through stuff and I'm trying to make sense of it. So it's an incredibly important question.
Yeah.
And the first thing that came to mind when you said that is, and I'm just kind of a broken record, but is the thing about loss. Like my lived experiences had so much of that. There's been so much to grieve that it would be impossible for me to talk about the divine without having the intellectual honesty to name the loss and try to define what that means. And try to define is, I mean, that's the operative phrase because I know I'm never going to actually do that. But I think it's an honorable thing for a human to enter into that and to attempt to do that because that's being, again, in alignment with my own reality. And I think it's an important exercise to do.
It's beautiful too. You know, here's what I'm thinking. What am I thinking?
Yeah.
This is
That's
a
a
good
good one.
question. I like this. I agree with Jonathan about lived experience. I think
Yeah.
it's such an important, we have to listen to that. It's part of what I talked about this weekend. Our lived experience is essential to our understanding of God. I'm kind of wondering about this though. Do you think God shows God's self to each of us differently and uniquely based on where we are and how we understand our world? Because I was sitting here thinking, okay, I have an idea of God as I'm looking around in this context, in this life and everything. And my first thought was, I swear to you, I would define God somehow based on my dogs. Like my experience with my dogs these days, right? This unconditional, this loving, just showing up. They're just always happy to see me. All kinds of, and then I thought, but that if I'm thinking about the people who live in Gaza, like that, maybe that's not their experience of God right now or what they need in God right now. And then I think about sitting with some of my clients who've gone through trauma and child abuse, early child sexual abuse. And I think, oh my gosh, that's not maybe what they think or feel or hope for or wish for. And then I think the next person, like if I lined up 20 people, our experience or what we may need from God in this moment or how we see God in the moment is going to probably look quite different. And I wonder, I don't know, I'm kind of okay with that, I think. I have to sit with that a little longer, but I think I might be okay with the idea that God shows up as God's self for each of us uniquely.
Yeah.
And then I think, whoa, like that is incredible. If that's the case, I don't know. I'm just going out in left field somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like, no, I definitely think I agree with the trajectory of where that's going. And maybe it's something like, when we talk about, it kind of depends on what scale we're talking. I mean, Tom's question is, what do you, what has been your experience? So being the lovely person that you are, you immediately start thinking, okay, well, this is true of me, but it may not be true for these people. So I think it just depends on what scale. It's like, it's also the way sometimes I talk about how important it is that we remember that we're all kind of like integrated. I mean, at a certain scale, we're not. Our skin separates us. But so if we're talking about skin organ, we're separate. We're talking about microbiome, we are not separate. If we're talking about mimetic psychology, we're not separate. So it just depends on what scale we're talking about. But I think what we're agreeing on for sure is that lived experience, your own thing. And look, if there's a God, you would think she would be creative enough to figure out a really unique, interesting, artistic way to relate to every single, not just person, but creature, organism, living thing in the whole universe. That's a pretty cool, compelling idea of God, except instead of that one that only speaks to me through Eurocentric, patriarchal, King James version Bible.
Yeah.
Tori, I was thinking, like, you're able to say, well, this is my experience. I'm experiencing God through my dogs in this very loving way. But when I sit down with so-and-so and when I think about so-and-so, I think that's how you experience God, though. Because you sit down with people, and then you have to show up differently for
Yeah.
each person and meet them where they are and give them what
Every
they need.
time.
So your contextualization of God is going to be very close to that
Mhm.
experience. Like, well, this is what I do, so this must be kind of what God does
Yeah.
as well. Meets us where
It's
we are, gives us what
beautiful.
we need.
That's interesting. She kind of answered the question in the way that she outlined the problem. She was answering the
Yeah.
question.
I love that you spelled that. I
Nice.
love that, Tom. That was yeah, I mean that is true in how I show up in my work. I'm very much shifting and just zoning in on somebody, right? And trying to listen on all these different levels of how do I need to be present for this person? And it does change from person to
Yeah.
person. And just my energy
Yeah.
shifts, right? My energy can be totally different from one client to the next, depending on what I'm sensing they might need or what they even ask for. That's fascinating. Okay. I like this. I like this, Tom. I like this connection you made.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, because you have to. There's a saying that I heard, I can never remember who said it, but they say that you treat other people the way you perceive God is treating you. And so it's really important that we have our God assumptions aligned with love instead of power. And when
Yes.
Thomas Ord kind of released all of his essays, and he asked people to write essays about his idea of omnipotence, mine was, I took the angle of how the doctrine of omnipotence encourages church spiritual abuse, because if God is an all-powerful being that just, operates authoritatively, then I must be that too, or some fashion of that. And so I that's something I've been kind of keyed in on, is how we view God is really important, because we're then going to exemplify that God into the world in our behaviors. And if we have these outdated, I don't think we've even made peace theologically with Copernicus, let alone Einstein. Like, like humans are not the center of the universe. And, we now understand this much more. But if you look at a lot of our theologies, they're very human and earth centric. Jesus is going to come back to the earth to set up the rule and reign of God, and, new creation. And that's a very earth centric thing. Is he going to rule the whole cosmos from the little speck of dust we call the earth in this little tiny galaxy in this big vast universe? Like, I don't know. But that's a human-centric, earth-centric, power-centric theology that has probably come down from the patriarchal understandings of hierarchy throughout the world. So I think reimagining God is something that we really have to do. It's important because it affects us, how we exemplify that God in the world. And I remember when John MacArthur said something stupid. He said,
as opposed to all those other things
they
he
just need to read
said
their
that
Bible.
weren't stupid.
I think anything I've ever heard him say, I'd say that about. But he specifically said that we don't need counseling, we just need to read our Bible. We don't need yoga because we need to read our Bible. We just need to read our Bible. And I'm like, that doesn't align with neurology, physiology, and psychology, and how we understand the human works. We can't just read ideas in a book and then be okay. So that's why I think this conversation is so important, and why I'm so curious is because I really want to start understanding God in bigger and better ways, because I think it affects everything around us, as you can see from our political landscape. Who's in the driver's seat right now, and what they're doing to the country is an exemplification of the God that they believe in. And I think that God is not one that is love-centric, but power-centric. So that's why I want to have this conversation. Yeah. What role does emotional well-being play in reimagining God? Let's talk about that one.
What role does emotional well-being play? These are good questions. I got to sit with them for a minute. I gotta let it resonate.
Yeah, well, it's
for a
running off of the
second.
John MacArthur quote of we don't need this, we just need to read our Bible. It's like he's not taking into effect this idea that we are psychological beings with emotions that are tied to chemicals being released in our brain that you can't just control by opening up a Bible and reading that God's got it all under control and you'll be fine. Like, that's just spiritually bypassing the issue. So then as we're
Sure is.
reimagining God, as we're thinking different thoughts about God, that's not just ideas based, but rooted in the human experience, what role would something like psychology
Mhm.
or our neurology, physiology, breath work and meditation or emotional well-being play in that reimagining of God?
Mhm.
Such a good question. Where my brain went on all this, where my thoughts went and my heart went, is that when I am depressed, I do think about God differently,
Mm,
right? Or I may not think about God at all. I might feel quite forsaken and hopeless, and there are times I've been suicidal, right, in my struggle, in my mental health. So in those moments of depression and severe mental illness, I very much, it changes my view of God. When I've sat with people who are exhibiting signs of schizophrenia, right? How they think about God is quite different in those moments. But when I'm also thinking about someone who's traumatized and who's coming out of, and they're triggered, they have PTSD, and their whole system is just, they can't settle. They're in flight or fight mode. They're in crisis mode. Their whole system is just jacked up, right? They can't think about things in the same way as when they're not. This is a fascinating question, and I think it profoundly impacts our view of God and what we might need or who we might need or the love or the care we might need in those
yeah.
moments looks vastly different.
I like
Yeah.
that
Go
thought.
on.
How about your psychological experience can change how you're thinking about God in the moment? Because when I was a
Yes.
teenager,
Yes.
I would have days where my brain is just working and I'm going great, and I'm like, well, what did I do to earn this? I must have prayed extra hard or read my Bible or started it right. And then there would be days where I wouldn't have that. I'd be like, what did I do wrong? Did I not pray enough? Did I not read my Bible enough? And then it turns out I just had chronic illness. And I'm like, oh, well, that explains a lot more.
Yes.
But it was changing how I thought
Yes.
about God in the moment. Like, oh, I must have done something wrong to not have been blessed with energy and vitality today. I got to do it better next time. It's just chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Jonathan, what kind of thoughts you got rolling around in your head? I can see you thinking. Like, I can see them.
Yeah, lots of thoughts. Emotional well-being. Well, I also wanted to back up to the stupidity of MacArthur's statement, just read the Bible.
Exactly.
Because it completely misses the reality. And again, reality is a word that's popped up now a few times. It's the thing I appreciate so much about so much of the way I'm at least attempting to live my life now. It's like in alignment with reality. That's incredibly important. It completely misses the reality that no one reads anything in a vacuum. Your very language, your socioeconomic standing, the country you come from, the hemisphere that you come from, the epoch, the time period, all of that. So if you grow up in a fundamentalist, hierarchical, male-dominated Christian household, of course that's going to affect everything you read about the Bible. So it's just ignorance, man. And actually for someone like him, it's worse than ignorance, because he would have been intelligent enough to have figured that out if he had wanted to. So that kind of stuff drives me crazy. Beyond that, emotional well-being, so many great things you've already said. Yeah, I think that whatever the divine is, first of all, if the divine is not love, I'm just not that interested. And yeah, I'm just not. And there's a difference between a loving God and a God of love. I would say that the system I grew up in, and sorry to say that so often, it's not like everything about where I came from was totally bad. There's a lot of really good things that came out of it. But by and large, that system talks about a loving God. You can have a loving God who descends down into the depths, who is close to the brokenhearted, who finds the hurting and is with them. But a God of love is already there. A God of love does not have to descend down into the depths. That God is already there. And that fundamental, it's a small change, but it winds up being a huge fundamental change, because now you got to explain, well, what is going on as that thing is being, as the heart is being broken and God is there at the same time. You know, the implications of that are huge. So how does that connect with emotional well-being? I'm just interested in a divine that cares about the person and is there and is not absent and then shows up later on to kind of fix things. Similar to like, is it Colossians that says that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. So God was not in the world reconciling Christ. He was in Christ reconciling the world. God didn't have his back turned when Jesus was being murdered. He wasn't off wringing his hands somewhere, just hoping that this sacrifice would be finally the one that would get his attention enough that he could then, focus all of his love on the humans and dispense forgiveness. That's garbage theology, and it's emotionally, physiologically, psychosomatically damaging. So I need the divine to be omnipresent, universally with me at all times, working these things out in real time. And that's just it. When I began to think that way, I recognized it was esteeming who I was more than the previous paradigm was. The previous paradigm kept robbing me of agency, kept robbing me of power. Not that a white, straight male, American Christian needs necessarily more power, so to speak. So I'm speaking loosely in these terms, but I love that empowerment of that thing. And so an emotionally healthy God and an emotionally healthy person, those things are incredibly important that we wrestle with what all that means.
You said something about John MacArthur not understanding reality, and then that was like a domino in my head, and it got me thinking about how the
Just one
gospel,
domino, or were there a lot
according
of
to
other dominoes involved?
there's other dominoes too.
Because
A
it's
couple,
not quite as
I'll name
dramatic
them.
if it's just one domino.
Boom. That would be so funny. Oh, so there's my domino. I was thinking about reality.
Here it went.
But he doesn't understand reality,
hilarious.
which then I got to thinking, like, does that mean that the gospel, according to fundamentalists, is just one big conspiracy theory? Like, science is telling you one thing, but really we know this is happening.
Yeah.
Evolution's fake. It's 6,000 years old, and
Right.
God made humans in a garden and put them there like tomatoes, like just planted them in the ground, and we're here. Yeah, it's all a big conspiracy theory. The way that I held my belief when I was a fundamentalist was the world is out to lie to you. So understand this small little understanding of how the world really works. When you pull back the veil and see the metaphysic of how the world is actually working, you're going to see it exactly as we have described it to you theologically. And growing up watching 700 Club, and it's like people died and went to heaven, now they come back and they're describing exactly what it looked like. And it's like they're trying to peel back the real world to then show you the metaphysic behind the real world to confirm their conspiracy theory understanding of the world's out to lie to you, but we have the truth. And then you look at how the government right now, being run by the fundamentalists, Catholic and evangelical, who believe that big conspiracy theory. And then everything's a big conspiracy theory now. It's just like, well, science did tell you this, but actually what we've found is they were lying to you the whole time. And it's just, is it just one big conspiracy theory? Like, we have control over that. We have power over that. We can control the narrative inside of it and your behavior and get you involved and attending and giving money. And we have this whole kingdom that we have built, and it's an empire, and it's all based on conspiracy thinking. And now you distrust the world, you distrust your humanity, your experience, everything. And then deconstruction hits, and you're like, my lived experience doesn't match the conspiracy. And then all of a sudden, what is true? It's like everything falls apart. And I think that is a huge reason people just like give up everything when they give up. And I don't blame them, because if they were sold a whole basket full of lies and conspiracies, then
Yes.
yeah, throw that thing away. But that doesn't necessarily have to define God and reality and love. And so I think we got to start reimagining God outside of that conspiracy theory fundamentalist bubble way of thinking. And what do you think about those thoughts? I just threw them out there. It was a couple dominoes. Did any dominoes fall for you?
I was thinking of emotional well-being and the lack thereof of all of what kind of what we grew up in, and how important, to your point, your question, right, is that if the slant is everything is a conspiracy theory, and that's shaping your view of God and all of this stuff, like, oh my gosh, that's so not okay. Emotional well-being.
Yeah,
It
causes
proves your
anxiety
point. Yeah.
and trauma, and then tells you, why don't you just read your Bible? That'll fix everything. Get back in the bubble. Get back in the narrative.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
All right.
And
Final
control.
question, because I know, Jonathan, you said you got to go in real soon here. If we can reimagine God for this modern world, just not necessarily correct our ideas, because if we just replace ideas with new ideas, it's not going to matter in our lived experience. So how can we then integrate new understandings of God into our daily life and rhythm, and not just replace old ideas with new ideas, but still have the same thinking, but just different, swapping out the ideas, like swapping out oppressors? Like, how could we actually integrate this reimagined God understanding into our lived experience in daily lives? And what are some practical things to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a good point that new thinking doesn't always isn't just going to fix everything. Tori and I's friend, it might be your friend too, Tom, but Jim Palmer wrote a nice little Substack post a couple of weeks ago that I've quoted now a handful of times. But just the way he wrote it reminded me how, especially deconstruction, it can emphasize the cognitive, mental piece of it, which obviously serves a purpose. But you can deconstruct in your brain and not realize that your body still holds the either the trauma or whatever would be less than trauma, just all the problems of the previous way that you lived. So what I heard you ask is, how do we, as I'm reinterpreting it, how do we embody a new way of living and a new way of thinking? And I think it's generally true. I don't know, Tori, if you think this is true. I think it's generally true that you act your way into new ways of thinking probably more than you think your way into new ways of acting. So whatever you can do to embody this thing and to have routines and practices and, set up little bumper lanes and boundaries in your life to make it easier to do particular things. Like routine for me has been really important. It's funny because growing up, and that's probably my artistic background, it's probably being the youngest of 5. I was the family entertainer. I didn't have a routine with anything except, ironically, playing football. That was it. That's the only thing I really cared about. Everything else was just craziness. So it took me a while to mature, and then I really was into my 40s before I realized kind of this rhythm, and even saying the word rhythm was a way for me to get a better routine. Like rhythm was an artistic word, and I'm like, oh yeah, you got to have rhythm for music to kind of make sense. So I think just getting into routines of bodily movement and sleep, it's incredibly important for me. So as we elevate all those kinds of things, and we could list a bunch of those, I think we're going to help ourselves and the next generation be able to embody, psychosomatic, spiritual alignment and living that's going to give them a chance at creating the next religions and the next things to help the humanity moving forward. So I don't know if I answered the question, other than just wanted to highlight that, that embodiment piece is so incredibly important and is not something again that Eurocentric white male led thing has, well, started to say has done well. They didn't do it at all. So it's something we got to think about.
Yeah. And I'm going to kind of just tag team right off of that. Where I went was listening to your body, right, in the day to day. And I think when we feel in our bodies that our body is tensing up, if our body is, if our joints are locked, if there's this constriction, right, there are all these clues that our body gives us that we're not okay. We're just not okay. Heart rate, breath rate, all the things, right? Or that we can't sleep, or we can't eat, or we're eating too much, or all the things, right? Our bodies are giving us these very important clues. And listening when someone else is telling me they're not okay in there, no matter what I think, right? So, and in terms of the gospel and Jesus, like he was addressing bodily needs. And I can't, every time I return to that, and this one time at OrtCon, Adam Clark said, it was a critique of, open and relational theology and all this stuff. And he was saying, and all these councils, right? And I'm a big historian, whole thing, church history. And all these councils, not once did they address poverty. Not once did they address healthcare. Not once did they address these basic needs of humanity. So if our emotional well-being, right, shapes, and then we apply that to the everyday and it shapes what we do in the world, I think we have to listen when other people are telling us and when our bodies are telling us we're not okay. And maybe just start there. And then what do we need to do to make sure we're taking care of one another so that we can begin to think differently and imagine differently and all the stuff.
Yeah. That kind of brings it down right to the ground level. Like pay attention to your body and pay attention to the people around you. And I like that. That's a great starting place of reimagining God. Like right here, right now, in your own body, in your own community.
Thank you.
I think that'll get us out of our ideas and loftiness and bring us back down to the ground. I like it. So this conversation has been so fun, so great. Thank you both for coming on and sharing some of your thoughts and some time of your day. This was wonderful. Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I was just going to say I'm only disappointed that we didn't make you cry.
Later. I'll cry later. But
okay.
Where do you want to send people to connect with what you're doing? Just throw out any links you want shared and I'll put them in the notes.
Yeah, okay. I'm at Substack. It's toriowens.substack.com. You can find me there.
Yeah, you can find me on Substack, or you can go to my website, jonathanfosteronline.com, and find all the ridiculous amounts of links that I'm involved in.
You got so many links.
I'll
just put as a link to your links.
Yes, that's what you need to do.
One master link to rule them all.
Love it.
All right. Well, Jonathan, I want to honor your time. You said you had to go at 2:15. It is that time. So thank you both for coming on the show. It has been great.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. It was fun.